Welcome to The Nation ASEAN Plus. I'm Jessy Chahal at Wisma Bernama right here in Kuala Lumpur. The just concluded state visit of the Chinese President Xi Jinping to Malaysia was described as highly successful, and the visit had further strengthened trade relations between both countries. Now, to discuss the outcomes of this visit, I have with me today Dr. Tan Chi Meng, Assistant Professor of Business Economics at the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Welcome to the program, Chi Meng. It's good to have you here with us as we look and reflect on the recent visit of the Chinese Premier. He did state on that visit as well that China will deepen friendly cooperation as well as look at jointly advancing Asia towards a more progressive era, a more modern era. In your view, what would a strong Malaysia-China joint venture or partnership look like in actual reality, in practice, and not just in theory or words?
Well, for sure, we have to deepen trading ties, technological transfer, and basically cooperating through maybe economic or industrial parks, as well as infrastructure, because ultimately what China is really interested in. So we have asked ourselves our question, what is China really interested with the relationship with ASEAN and Malaysia in particular? One of the things they're really interested in is the infrastructure that actually goes from, say, on land or sea, from Malaysia all the way down to maybe Johor in Singapore, that would actually ease the transport of goods and services. But on top of that, there would be a sort of political sort of stance where China could actually showcase that it's like a benevolent big brother, whereby it could actually, people in the region, countries, smaller countries in the region can actually benefit from the expertise that the Chinese actually have, whether it's economic, technological, and so on.
What was the thought process or perhaps the original intention with this visit?
Well, I wouldn't want to presume that I know what President Xi's visits, intentions were for his visit, but I would say that part of the reason is because our king has actually invited him over, and Malaysia has very, very friendly ties with China for many, many years now, and this is also one reason why Malaysia has pandas alongside Indonesia and Singapore. Not everyone gets pandas, so we have to understand that panda diplomacy is actually sort of a seal of approval from Beijing. So that said, we have been very cooperative with China. We have been very supportive of their initiatives like the Belt Road Initiative and so on. As a result, I think one reason why he's coming here is because he wants to show that China is very friendly with Malaysia, and because Malaysia has been very supportive of Beijing. And on top of that, there's also probably issues related to the tariffs that's going on between the US and China. Which
is, of course, heating things up on the sidelines as well.
Very big issue.
Definitely. Now, it's been more than or about 12 years since President Xi Jinping's last visit to Malaysia. This visit, of course, being one that was called a very high-profile state visit. We had road closures, and it was a lot of focus and effort on this visit to ensure that it was a highly successful one and that we'd also, as a nation, met with expectations. Why do you think the timing of this visit is so significant, especially now with Malaysia being ASEAN's chair?
Well, Malaysia has the ability to sort of influence the agenda within ASEAN because we are the chair after all. And the fact that the US tariffs are actually hitting China really, really hard probably means that China really needs to find friends to actually trade with, ensure its supply chain is actually intact, and sort of make sure that investments are actually intact as well. ASEAN is the largest trading partner for China right now as a bloc. We're about 15 or 16% of its total trade is with ASEAN. We're actually bigger than the EU and bigger than any other country right now. So that said, China actually has a certain economic need to befriend ASEAN, and I think this is also one of the main reasons why President Xi actually visited Malaysia.
In terms of optics with this visit, do you think this would uplift our nation's role within the regional bloc? The very fact that the Chinese Premier was here in the country, of course, he's also going to be touring a bit of Asia in that sense, visiting other countries. But does this elevate our profile as ASEAN chair?
I think certainly when China becomes increasingly prominent with its presence in terms of trade and technology and security and so on within the region, friends of China would actually play a very important role in actually having dialogues and probably influencing Chinese influence Chinese policy as well. So I would say that yes, it definitely has that particular effect. And like I said, panda diplomacy is like a seal of approval. Malaysia has pandas, and we're very friendly with China. So I would say that President Xi's visit and our role as as chair would actually be more prominent as we actually go.
So as you pointed out earlier, you do see this as part of a broader strategy to strengthen presence within ASEAN on the back of, as you've pointed out as well, the current global trade tensions. Where are we at this point of time in terms of that dynamics?
I mean, we definitely have had pretty good relations with China. And so what China actually needs right now is to sort of have a more comprehensive strategic partnership with us. So, I mean, we already have that since the mid-2010s and stuff like that. But we actually are interested in moving further with that. So I would say that China actually wants more dialogue with Malaysia. They actually want to have more partnerships in terms of trade, in terms of investments as well as security. And this is definitely moving, I think, more closely as we actually go forward.
A lot of things were discussed, agreed upon, and handshook upon during this visit as well. President Xi put forward a 3-point proposal on building a high-level strategic China-Malaysia community with a shared future. Give us context as to what that would entail.
Well, maybe it's a little vague to say that, but basically when you have all these different strategies, what China has been really interested in is they want to have progress or development on their own terms without actually looking at the West and basically saying, you know, we have to follow what you guys are telling us and so on and so forth. So this sort of shared prosperity, which is what President Xi has been talking about in the past, basically means that development for different countries would actually take place at their own pace within their own context, and this is what he's actually very interested in. So although China is our strategic partner, so what we can actually benefit a lot from is say technological sharing. Like if you look at ECRL, there are definitely technological issues as to why China could actually build these sort of infrastructure so quickly and it could actually do it so efficiently. These are things that we can actually learn.
Well, if we look at that 3-point proposal, just to outline that, firstly, it did spell out the two countries must adhere to strategic independence and carry out high-level strategic work together. Secondly, China-Malaysia should build synergy for development and set a model for high-quality development cooperation. And finally, both sides to carry forward their friendship from generation to generation and deepen exchanges and mutual learning between both civilizations. What again do you think could be the ideation or the intention with ensuring that these 3 points or criteria is ticked off?
I mean, if you look at people exchange, which is a third point, we're looking at tourists coming in from China and tourists going into China and into Malaysia and so on and so forth. And you'll have like educational exchange, like Salmon University is one initiative that we have. So it could be in the future that some of the top-notch universities from China could actually consider opening branch campuses, whether it's Tsinghua University, Beijing University, because we have to understand that China is no longer the China that we actually understand or understood. Innovation-wise, technology-wise, they're actually very, very strong. So we could actually benefit a great deal from that perspective. And if you're looking at, say, joint development, obviously if you're looking at the railroad, the ECRL, and the high-speed railway and stuff, if you could actually link all these things, which was what they're doing with the Vietnamese government in their region, their country and all that, that would basically mean there's a lot more trade, there's a lot of people-to-people movement, and definitely places that were typically in a more rural, less developed places would actually benefit a great deal from that. So when you talk about joint development, it's basically that, where places that were sort of neglected in the past could actually see some kind of economic revival or prosperity.
Well, it's something interesting that you said earlier, that China is no longer what we think, used to think it was. Draw us that picture of the sort of then and now, and what really has spurred them into this, you know, sort of driver's seat within Asia, if you will.
China has been called the factory of the world for a long time now. So they were basically manufacturing consumer goods like household appliances, furniture, and so on. So these are things that were basically lower in value, but they were actually exporting them like crazy because China's idea of what an economic policy is growth first. But here's the thing. When you actually start becoming richer and you become wealthier, things that actually made China very competitive, which is lower labor costs, became an issue. So you can't actually build stuff that are necessarily cheap anymore. So this is what you call the middle income trap. You actually sort of become richer and richer, and then you're sort of stuck in the middle income group, and you have difficulties moving into high income. So this is the reason why the Chinese government, the Chinese economy has sort of switched from what we call the 3 O, which are like the stuff they used to make, into the three new, like electric vehicles, lithium batteries, as well as solar panels, so that they could actually export high-value, export-oriented stuff to actually spur the economy once more. So they've actually moved from things that we would consider cheap into things that are actually high-tech right now.
Well, China also indicated readiness to sign what we know as the ASEAN-China Free Trade Upgrade Protocol. No timeline has been given, but the word soon is indicative of in the nearest future. As an economist as well, and from your point of view, how might this upgraded ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement transform existing dynamics or trade dynamics within the region? And are there specific sectors that we're looking into?
I mean, if you're looking at sectors, China is doing very, very well, or at least doing increasingly well in things like AI, green technology, and so on. Malaysia will probably benefit a great deal from that sort of tech as well. So if you're looking at sort of a cooperation between China and Malaysia, that is definitely one area to look at. And so if you're looking at the deepening of the free trade agreement we have between ASEAN and China, definitely we could actually loosen bureaucracy. We can actually make things easier to transport goods. When you actually do that, a lot of the small medium enterprises or micro small medium enterprises will actually benefit from that, because one of the problems we have for the MSMEs is that they may not have the infrastructure and resource to actually export their stuff elsewhere. So if the free trade agreement could actually deepen and it could actually sort of loosen some of these looser ends and actually make things easier for smaller businesses to actually thrive and export stuff, we will see our economy actually grow eventually.
Well, from AI to satellites and everything in between, upon departure, it was 31 Malaysia-China MOUs that were inked or were signed. What were some of those MOUs that really stood out for you?
I think tech, because we need that. In economics, we know that one reason why you have like major growth in any economy is because of tech. And so Malaysia can definitely benefit a great deal from that. So moving forward, I mean, when we become more green, when we actually become more tech savvy, AI savvy, and so on, semiconductors and all that, we definitely would benefit a great deal from the Chinese expertise.
The Chinese premier did say that this will usher in a new golden era for both countries, despite the instability or the uncertainty that's happening in the world right now. And of course, on the back of the recent visit, as well as we saw, what's really also something that's ongoing and a big focus is the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. These projects, as you mentioned as well earlier, the ECRL and the two countries' twin parks, that's again in the spotlight as well. How can Malaysia really help to maximize the benefits with these initiatives while we balance our national interests?
Well, there's always the accusation that Malaysia is becoming too dependent on China. So obviously, as a smaller developing country, we do have to balance our needs in such a way that we don't become too overly dependent on one country, or at least the perception is so. So if you're asking for balancing, definitely what we actually need is to have other people, like other economies, strong economies, come in and sort of invest in Malaysia as well. And I think we are in an interesting time right now, because China and America are sort of locked in this major power conflict, using the tariffs as sort of a weapon or a tool. So countries that are sort of standing in the middle, that have some degree of neutrality, would be probably sought after by both powers or other powers who are trying to sort of curry favor or win some sort of concession. So I would say that we should definitely get the Western powers, or maybe even like Japan and Korea and all that, to invest increasingly in our country. By that way, we could actually balance out what's actually going on. So I would say, from a balancing perspective, that is what we ought to be doing.
Well, you brought up something interesting earlier, where you said that there could be concern of depending too much on China, whether it's just Malaysia or other countries within Asia as well. Do you think that that is a valid concern?
I think, at least from a perception perspective, that is true. But the reality is, many countries are sort of quote-unquote dependent on China for its economy, but for security, they may actually depend on the U.S. or the West. So I would say that in the case of Malaysia, our Prime Minister has been engaging increasingly with the Americans as well in the past. And then, as far as joint military exercises are concerned, we actually have the most of the U.S. So I wouldn't say that we're being taken over. It's not, we're nowhere near that anyway. But yes, we do have a certain dependency on China, but who doesn't anyway? Most countries actually have China as its great largest trading partner. So if you're talking about dependency from that perspective, then we're all dependent.
There's much focus and highlight on the fact that there are shared values between both countries from the perspective of empathy, sincerity, harmony and righteousness as well. And the aim, I think, for both countries moving forward and was agreed upon is that both countries do want to come together to work on regional prosperity. Sort of zooming in, what does this mean for the everyday person, whether in China or Malaysia? What sort of daily life changes are we going to see come out of this, so to speak?
Well, economists know that free trade is a good thing. So when you have greater free trade within a region where people actually integrate economically and they actually can buy stuff at relatively lower cost, obviously that's a good thing. So when you're looking at economic integration at the regional level, I would say that, you know, we have like lower or less barriers of trade. We have people-to-people movement that actually takes place quite often. So that would basically mean if the infrastructure and the Belt and Road Initiative, the idea was to sort of build infrastructure in such a way that people could actually access places from one part of the world to another more easily. That would also ease all sorts of transfers, whether it's people, we're talking about business deals and all that sort of stuff. It's actually easier that way. So for the normal people, you're talking about becoming richer, you're talking about having more businesses, you're more your network increases, connectivity, and so on. And I think connectivity is the whole idea as to why China actually wanted the Belt and Road Initiative. And if we can actually connect even more using some sort of regional framework, that would actually make it a lot easier.
Now, sort of zooming out from Malaysia to, Malaysia being the ASEAN chair as a regional bloc, but within the region as well. Looking at global stability, do we see a growing trend that in that aspect where Asia is able to position itself as a bigger consumer of market share and to balance that global economic or influence within the coming few years? Are we going to see a trend or sort of a shift in power in that aspect?
I think the Southeast Asian part of the world has sort of been neglected for some time, and right now, but I always tell people that we are like the backyard of China. It's for securities reasons, for economic reasons. China is definitely paying a great deal of attention to us.
Backyard of China? Give us a better
Well, basically, we're there. So we have always been there, but the region has never received too much attention. I think from the West, for instance, Trump has some interest in it, but by what we actually see, it doesn't seem like that's a very big concern or issue for him. Not yet, anyway. Now, of course, China is the main focus for the Americans. But at the end of the day, I would say that we definitely have. So when I say backyard, it's not a bad thing per se. But basically, we are there. So China has to sort of say and acknowledge that we're there. So let's deal with them. Let's trade with them. Let's actually talk to them and actually prosper together.
With Malaysia aiming to attract 5 million Chinese tourists annually, what more can be done on the back of education, perhaps as well, to sustain this momentum beyond just being visa-free?
Well, for sure, what you can actually do is to sort of be more friendly towards the. Well, you can actually have like hotels, airports, and so on, where you have Chinese people working there, or people who speak Chinese who are working there, who would actually guide people more easily. You're talking about maybe major tourist attractions that would actually have guides that are very fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and so on. I mean, basically, one of the reasons why tourists actually come to any particular locale is to feel like they're welcome. They actually like being there. So in some sense, if you're trying to attract Chinese people to come over here, that's one thing. But you could also have like more direct flights that actually come from China. So from some of the first tier, second tier, third tier cities, there might be direct flights that come in. So people from different parts of this very large nation could actually come and actually visit Malaysia as a result. So we have to look at connectivity, travel. We look at how accessible, how friendly we are. And these are things we have to look at in order to have more tourists come into the country.
So as an economist looking into all of this, what do you make out of it? What sort of sentiments are you seeing, or perhaps a particular strategy or trend that has really stood out to you to go, this is interesting. We've not seen movement like this in the recent years.
I think I will use a particular term that Professor Wang Gangwu, a very prominent sinologist, actually said. The idea of 天下. So the idea 天下, it's a Mandarin term, but it literally translates to under the heaven. So what China actually was in the past was a vast empire that basically was doing its own thing. And there were all these neighboring countries that were actually around. So what it actually took, the role that it actually took was more like a big brother's kind of role. And so what we're seeing right now with the Belt Road Initiative, with all the projects on the engagement, is sort of like, I guess China is trying to position itself as like a benevolent force in trying to help regional powers actually prosper and do well. And they've been doing this ever since President Xi has actually came into power. I mean, they've been doing it before, but I think he actually made this idea of common prosperity and all that one of the agendas of his presidency earlier on. So definitely I say that this is one of the major things that really stood out for me for some time now.
Well, of course, on the back of 31 China-Malaysia MOUs that are signed from various different industries as well, we want to really get a better understanding of what some of these proposals or agreements actually meant. They are a wide range, but they've also been termed a new golden era for bilateral ties with a strong focus on future-ready industries. Which do you think would hit the ground running? Which sectors are you most excited about?
Well, I don't know what will hit the ground running anytime soon because we're still trying to see how we're deepening ties with China right now. But definitely AI, semiconductors, green tech, these are definitely areas that we would benefit a great deal from because after all, they're high value. They're also export oriented. So if we can actually get these things off the ground as quickly as we can, we definitely would do very well for it. It will be very beneficial for our economy.
In terms of 5G, smart cities, what do you envision there?
We need investors. And China could actually be one of those. Of course, China has its own challenges to deal with at the moment, but I would say that if we were to deepen ties with China, and this would definitely be one of the areas to look at, whether it's the forest city in Johor or whether you're looking at the HSR and all these things, we're interested in connectivity. And I suppose smart cities will become a reality and a much more viable kind of project if connectivity, if transportation infrastructure is actually dealt with. So we should definitely have infrastructure. We need to deal with that first, and then smart cities would actually come very easily.
So one thing after the other, sort of a follow-through effect.
Of course, yes.
A lot of speculation around the Chinese president's visit to Malaysia or within Asia. Was it a knee-jerk reaction to what the US has done, or was this something already in the pipeline?
It's not a knee-jerk reaction because this has been going on for months now. China has basically prepared, I think, for this eventuality that the Americans under a new Trump presidency would actually reignite a greater trade war. They have been preparing for this because when Trump first came into his first presidency, it was 25% tariffs, right? And eventually, we thought that maybe with Joe Biden, things would actually be okay, but it wasn't like that because Joe actually maintained a lot of these tariffs and actually added more stuff like electric vehicles, 100% tariffs and all that. So you can only imagine if someone like Joe, who was actually not a big fan of Donald Trump or his policies in the past, maintained these tariffs, what would a new Trump or a second Trump presidency actually
Version
entail?
2.0.
Version 2.0. So China basically they were prepared for this, but how well were they prepared for that is a different question. So I don't think it was a knee-jerk reaction, and China knew since 2020 that ASEAN has been one of its largest, if not the largest, trading bloc with China. So visiting is definitely something that they would have done anyway.
Well, looking back at some of the key moments of the visit and before as well in terms of bilateral relations between China and Malaysia, what do you consider to be the most significant turning point in that relationship?
I think when we actually move, I mean, apart from setting up diplomatic relations and all that, when we actually move from like strategic partnerships into like comprehensive strategic partnerships, these were very big things. So you're moving into, normal bilateral ties to higher and higher, more and deeper ties that's actually going on. I would say this is definitely a turning point in the 2013 period, and then with Anwar and our king being very welcoming towards the president, I think it's definitely another turning point right now, as far as I can tell, because President Xi seems to be very happy with the visit, and I think that he's definitely very interested in deepening ties with ASEAN through Malaysia, since Malaysia has been very, very friendly towards China for decades now.
Well, that's all the time we have on this episode. Thank you, Chiming, for coming in and sharing some insights there as well. For more updates on ASEAN developments, do visit the ASEAN page on bernama.com. I'm Jessy Chahal. This has been The Nation ASEAN Plus. Thanks for watching, and follow us for more in-depth conversations on topics that matter.